When I was a little boy, I was a connoisseur of opera music. I had some cultural tastes and a somewhat precociously advanced ear for that sort of music. I learned it by listening carefully to the radio. This, of course, was the days before television, and I remember the first piece of opera music that I learned to love was the William Tell Overture, because it introduced my favorite radio program, The Lone Ranger. Do you remember that? That was my initiation into opera music, although I heard some on Our Gal Sunday and some of the soap operas that were on in the afternoon. But I used to love The Lone Ranger. And in the cold winter nights back in Pittsburgh, we had these heat registers at various places around the house, and one of them was on the step between the living room and the den, and I used to curl up in a ball in front of that heat register while it was cold outside and sort of cuddle with my dog that was a fat, overgrown dachshund named Soldier, because I got him in the middle of World War II, and Soldier and I used to listen to the adventures of the Lone Ranger and Jack Armstrong and Hop Harrigan and Captain Midnight and all of the rest. And the thing that was so neat about those radio programs was that you couldn't see anything but the radio dial. But you could only listen to the story with your ears. But as I would listen to these adventures, I would imagine in my mind's eye what all of these characters would look like and what the action scenes would be like if I could really see them with my eyes. Because I grew up in an era where our entertainment was through audio and not video. And I'll never forget the first time I watched an actual broadcast television program when I was a teenager and saw the magic mirror. The Dumont Television Network, WDTV, Channel 2 in Pittsburgh, showed people that were miles and miles away that I could actually see by looking at that magic screen. And I didn't understand at that moment that all of civilization was going through a profound change that would affect life in ways that I could never anticipate with the advent of television. Right now, I'm standing before this group, and we are doing this lecture in the confines of a broadcast television studio in Orlando, Florida, Channel 6, in a room perhaps right over here next to me. They're getting ready for the 6 o'clock news. And there's a control booth in the next hall down the way a little piece, and there are all kinds of monitors and sophisticated equipment. And I'm standing now in what looks like a lovely, warm room, but it's all fake. These walls here aren't real walls. I could just push them hard and they'd fall over. The clock over here, we have to make all kinds of gyrations to give you the image of reality. And before I came in here a few moments ago, I had to go through the onerous process of having some very beautiful woman sit there and apply makeup to my face to hide the blemishes, the warts, the moles, the creases that come with age. And so that the R.C. Sproul that you're looking at now on television is someone who's been created by all of these technicians. And after every lecture, they come in here and tell me, straighten out your sleeve, straighten out your tie. See, they hide the wires. They tape them in my coat. Because with the advent of television, people are now responding to impressions. And philosophers have said about this that we're now living in an age of impressions where accurate perception of reality is not what is important. It's the impression that is communicated. It is the image that is presented that matters. And what this has done, ladies and gentlemen, has provoked a crisis of unprecedented magnitude regarding probably the most fundamental of all human intellectual questions, the question of the nature of truth itself. We remember the book that shook the academic world by Alan Bloom, called The Closing of the American Mind. And as an analyst of culture, Professor Bloom opened this book by making the statement that 90-some% of people who come into college as entering freshmen today, that it is safe to assume that when they arrive on the campus, they come to this initiation to higher education already convinced of and committed to the relativity of truth. 90-some% of students who graduate from high school, who enter the halls of learning, come to the university already persuaded that truth is relative, that there is no such thing as objective reality. Now, I would have hoped that Dr. Bloom would have gone on from there to say, but the task of higher education, critical thinking, equipping students with the tools of analysis, philosophical inquiry, scientific investigation, would have opened their minds and directed them apart from this relativism, which makes science ultimately impossible, which makes truth ultimately meaningless, that the tools of higher education would deliver these poor misguided freshmen from this naive assumption of relativism. Instead, what Dr. Bloom announced was that 4 years of higher education today simply confirms in the minds of the freshmen that there's no such thing as objective truth. Only impressions, only images, only preferences. No objective reality. And so then he articulates the meaning of the book, The Closing of the American Mind. That to which the American mind has become closed, ladies and gentlemen, is truth. Truth in any objective sense. I remember during the life and ministry of Francis Schaeffer, that Schaeffer made popular a phrase that he used frequently when he referred to what he called true truth. Now, isn't that the silliest thing you've ever heard of? What is true truth? True truth. When somebody speaks of true truth, it sounds like somebody talking about beautiful beauty, or lovely loveliness, or ugly ugliness. True truth or false falsehood, that's what we call in language a redundancy, a tautology, where there's nothing added, no synthesis, no new knowledge added to the original terms by the modifiers or the qualifiers. True truth? Did the man stutter? No. What he was trying to do with that odd way of speaking was to say, in our culture today, we have a war going on between two different views of truth. The majority view is that truth is what I want it to be. Truth is relative. Truth is, again, a matter of image or a perception. As opposed to those who believe, no, something is either real or it isn't. Schaeffer meant by true truth, objective truth, objective reality. He was trying to resurrect, if you will, a classic concept of truth called the correspondence theory of truth. John Locke made this famous, of course, in the rise of British empiricism, but it has its roots far earlier than Locke and his ideas. The correspondence theory of truth, in its simplest expression, simply says this, and we can all understand it, that truth is that which corresponds to reality. Therefore, to tell the truth would be to tell it like what? It is. That there is an isness. Not just a seemness, but an isness. And to tell it like it is to tell it as reality determines it. The correspondence theory, truth is that which corresponds to reality. But the problem with that theory is this. Not everybody agrees what reality is. I once saw a program where F. Lee Bailey had a television show, and he was demonstrating some of the problems that courtroom lawyers have in determining the truth of one's guilt or innocence in a trial. And he talked about the way evidence is presented in the courtroom and how important in American jurisprudence has been eyewitness testimony. And F. Lee Bailey was standing in the middle of a stage giving a lecture about the value of eyewitness testimony when in the midst of his lecture, some guy ran across the stage, interrupted his speech, yelled at him, flailed his arms, and then ran off the stage as suddenly as he had come on the stage. And F. Lee Bailey was startled, and he stepped back from the podium, and he stopped, and he said, "Let me forget my speech for a moment," took a microphone and began to interview people in the audience and said, "Did you see what happened?" "Well, yeah, we were watching the whole thing." And he began to interview them. And he interviewed like 5 people, and all 5 of them said that this man came in and hit F. Lee Bailey and ran off. And then, to make his point, F. Lee Bailey had the programmers show the video tape and rerun of what actually had happened. And the man never came within 2 feet of slapping F. Lee Bailey. He waved his arms, but he didn't hit him. But eyewitnesses right there at the very moment, not after their memories were dimmed or influenced by the passing of time, at that very moment, all 5 of the eyewitness testimonies were wrong. What they perceived did not really happen. So their testimony did not correspond to reality. And so the crisis of the correspondence theory became, truth is that which corresponds to reality as perceived by whom? From your viewpoint? From your viewpoint? From your viewpoint? We don't always have the same perspective. We don't always look at things from the same angle. So ultimately, from a Christian perspective, the correspondence theory of truth was modified to say this: the truth is that which corresponds to reality as it is perceived by God. Because God sees reality in its fullest measure from the perfect perspective, the depth dimension as well as the surface. All things are known to Him. But the point I come to is this: that from the perspective of one who is omniscient, there is such a thing as objective reality. And in fact, our eternal destinies will be determined by God's perception of reality. The reality and the truth about me. And the reality and the truth about you. I can do everything I want to hide my blemishes when I stand before Almighty God. But there's nothing that I can do to present an image that will stop the penetrating glance of his analysis. He will see past the image. He will see past the impression and get to the truth of the matter of me as a person and also of you. That's why Jesus warns that in the final analysis, all truth, reality, that which is hidden, that which is done in secret, that which is distorted, everything that is now hidden and concealed will be made manifest. That's frightening, isn't it? I talked to a student a few years ago on a college campus who we were speaking about the character of God, and this student said to me, "Well, I don't believe in the existence of God." She said, "For me, the idea of God is meaningless. I don't get any excitement out of thinking about God. I don't go to church. I don't read the Bible. I don't pray. I don't do any of those things. So for me, there is no God. But I don't have any quarrel with you, Dr. Sproul. If you believe in God, and if it's meaningful to you, if you enjoy praying and singing hymns and going to church while I'm playing golf on Sunday morning, if you enjoy those things, and it means something to your personal life, then for you, God is real. For me, God is not real. It's all relative. If the idea of God turns you on, then for you, God is true. If it's meaningless to me, then God is not true." I said, "I don't think you understand what I'm talking about." She says, "Why?" I said, "I'm not talking about a God who passes in and out of being according to my pleasure or according to your whim. I'm talking about a God who exists objectively. I'm talking about a God who exists whether I believe in him or not. I'm talking about a God who exists whether you believe in him or not." Don't you see what I'm talking about? I'm trying to get at the question of reality. I'm not interested in impressions here. I'm not interested in preferences. I want to get to the truth. Is there a God or isn't there? God cannot be and not be at the same time and at the same relationship. I said, I'm talking about a God who, if he exists, and you don't believe that he exists, and you don't pray to him, and you don't read the Bible, and you're not interested at all, I'm talking about a God that if he exists, all of your unbelief and all of your disinterest in the matter does not have the power to destroy him. And in like manner, I'm talking about a God who, if he does not exist, I can pray until I'm blue in the face, I can sing hymns until I'm exhausted, I can preach sermons every Sunday for the rest of my life, and none of those things has the power to conjure such a being up if the one does not exist. I'm talking about truth, not preference. I'm talking about reality. Now, does that sound strange to you? If you're one of those 90-some% who are already convinced that truth is relative, let me say to you, you don't believe that. Bloom's wrong. Bloom's dealing with an impression here. Bloom is saying, when I quiz these students and when I examine these students, they're telling me that they believe in the relativity of truth. No, Dr. Bloom. They're saying that they believe in the relativity of truth when it suits them to believe in the relativity of truth. A person can't survive on this planet and believe in the relativity of truth. A person can't live for 15 minutes on this planet and believe in the relativity of truth. That kind of a person is a person we lock up for their own safety in an insane asylum because they've lost their minds. They're not just confused in their mind. They've lost their mind. They're stark, raving mad. You believe in the correspondence theory of truth every time you drive up to a traffic light and you look at the intersection. And you see this great big semi coming down the highway, 75 miles an hour. And you're saying, I'm having an impression of a fast-moving car that if I pull out a truck, if I pull out in front of it, I'm going to be obliterated and knocked to smithereens. But I prefer, not that it's all relative, I'll just proceed. Oh, no. All of a sudden, you're committed to objective truth because your life depends on it. No. We only embrace relativism when objective truth is a threat to us. And there's no objective truth more threatening to us than the truth of the holiness of God. Because if that truth is real, we are in trouble, deep trouble, and we know that. I think one of the most important and fascinating discussions of truth ever happened took place in a trial, in a courtroom, where the question of truth was the order of the day, where a Jewish rabbi was on trial for his life before a Roman provincial governor. And this Jewish rabbi had been teaching concepts, truths, as it were, that some people didn't like. And they accused this man of teaching things that were seditious and could ultimately be destructive to the Roman Empire itself. And so this teacher was arrested and placed on trial for his life, and the record of that is found in the Gospel according to St. John. Verse 33 of the 18th chapter of John's Gospel, we read this summation of matters during the trial. Pilate, therefore, entered again into the praetorium, and he summoned Jesus, and he said to him, "You are the king of the Jews?" Now let's stop right there. Pilate, as it were, is saying, I'm getting this impression from the charges that are brought against you and the scuttlebutt I'm picking up from the multitudes and the crowds here that have been screaming your name for a week, that you're some kind of king. You're some kind of monarch. You know how we Romans who are occupying this land take a dim view of you self-appointed kings here. He said, there's no ruler over you, you understand, except Caesar. You're the king of the Jews? It's a question. Jesus is Jewish. He knew from the time he was a child that Jewish people answer questions with questions. And so he answered, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" Is it to say, Jesus said, who wants to know? Is this an honest question you're asking me? Let me just make a parenthetic statement here. Ladies and gentlemen, all of us succumb from time to time to asking insincere questions as a tactic of evasion, of avoiding a penetrating question that makes us uncomfortable. I remember once being engaged in a discussion with a man on matters of theology and philosophy. And he said, I would like to be a Christian. He said, but I really have some honest questions that I need to have answered, and can you help me? And I said, well, that's my job. I teach apologetics. That's part of my vocation, is to try to give intelligible answers to people that are genuinely puzzled by things. I said, see if I can help you. And he asked me a question, and I answered it, and I said, are you satisfied with that answer? And he said, yes, I am. He said, but I have another question. And he asked me the next question, and he was satisfied with the answer to that one, and then another one, and another one. And after about 40 questions, I said, hold it. I said, I'll continue to try to answer your questions if you want to, but now I'm beginning to get the sense that you're not really honest. I think you are trying to find a way to escape the claim of God on your life. Now, if your questions are serious, I will try to engage a discussion with you seriously. But I have to be upfront with you. I have to be honest with you. I don't trust you right now. And the guy broke down right in front of me and admitted that that's exactly what he was doing. I've done that. Haven't you done that? You just keep asking questions forever when they've lost their sincerity. Pilate answered, I'm not a Jew, am I? It's your own nation, the chief priests, that delivered you up to me. What have you done? Jesus ignores that question and goes back to the original question, this question about kingship, and he said to him, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting, that I might not be delivered up to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. Boy, what a provocative thing to say to the emissary of the Roman emperor. Hey, governor, it's like Jesus says to him, my kingdom's not of this world. And boy, are you lucky. Because if it were of this world, it'd be the end of you, Jack, and the end of the Roman Empire, because I got enough strength in my kingdom that's of another world. I could call on angels, I could call on the heavenly hosts, and you guys would be history in no time. Can you imagine a prisoner standing there in chains talking like that to the power of Rome, of imperial Rome? But Jesus obviously doesn't say that in an arrogant fashion. He's speaking the truth. The unvarnished truth. He said, my kingdom, he acknowledges that he has a kingdom. But he said, take it easy, Pilate. My kingdom's not like ordinary kingdoms. My kingdom's not involved with the political machinations and the Machiavellian power plays and the coup d'etats that are such a normal part of the politics of this world. No. My kingdom's not like that. If my kingdom were like that, I'd take over. My servants would have been fighting, and I wouldn't even have been delivered up to the Jews, let alone to you. So Pilate picks up on this and says back to Jesus, so you are a king. You haven't established where this kingdom is. It's not of this world. It's not of Palestine. Maybe it's east of the sun and west of the moon. But at least I can understand what you're saying, Jesus. You're saying that you're a king. Huh? Don't try to trick me. You may say that it's a different world, but you've just admitted to being a king. So you are a king. Jesus answered, you say correctly that I am a king. Do you hear what Jesus is saying? Did you hear what Jesus is saying? Jesus is saying, in this trial for his life, under oath, this man who would be the last person in human history to commit perjury, he is saying to Rome, I am a king. That's the truth. I am a king. That's the watershed truth of human history, ladies and gentlemen. That is the reality upon which the entire Christian faith is established. The affirmation that Jesus Christ is King. And he's not just king for a day. And he's not just made up to look like a king, to give the impression of the king, to have an image of kingship. He's not just a king that reigns in people's hearts. He's not a king simply for those who prefer to believe that he is a king. He is the king, the cosmic king, the king of the universe, the king of the kingdom. And that's the objective truth upon which my life stands or falls. and upon which your life will stand or fall. You say correctly that I am a king. Now listen to what Jesus says to the man. He says, for this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. You know, have you ever been engaged in any activity and somebody comes up to you, taps you on the shoulder and say, what are you doing? What are you all about? What are you up to? We can leave it to people to guess what we're all about. But if they really want to know what's motivating us and what's driving us, the best source that they can learn that from is ourselves. You know, I can remember when I was in junior high school, we had a guest speaker come to our youth group, and it was a black woman. And this woman came, and she gave a speech to us, and the whole group to whom she was speaking was white. Everybody was white. And this woman, who was a woman of great dignity and obviously highly intelligent, educated, and sophisticated, and in a gentle way, she admonished us. She said, friends, she said, I want to explain something to you about my people. My people are usually referred to by your people as colored people. And that hurts us. We're not colored. You know, it's not like we're a group of people that are painted orange or red or chartreuse or purple or anything like that. We are not colored people. And it is an insult to us to be called colored people. And then she said, how do you like it when somebody forgets your name? How do you like it when somebody mispronounces your name? And I thought, whoa. When somebody calls me Sproul, it's like somebody taking their fingernails on a chalkboard, you know, goes up and down my spine. And I say, people, call me Sproul, I growl. My name is Sproul, it rhymes with soul. Is that hard to remember? I hate to have my name mispronounced. And I think, man, this must really be an indictment of my pride that I get bent out of shape when somebody so overlooks my significance that they don't have the decent courtesy to find out how to say my name. She said, nobody likes that. And she said, every human being should be called what they want to be called. And then she went on to say, we prefer to be called Negroes. And so I said, okay, from this day forth, I'm never going to refer to Negroes as colored people. They're not colored people. They don't want to be called colored people. I'm not going to be insulting to them. You know, and so I disciplined myself to say Negro. And then the next thing I knew, that was not the preferred thing. It then became black or Afro-American or whatever. And I don't care if it changes again next week. The principle doesn't change. That people should be called by what they want to be called. See? Lest we insult their dignity and just simply let our own prejudice determine these things. Now, Jesus said, I want to tell you how you should understand me. I can say, well, I think Jesus came into this world for this reason or for that reason. But if we want to get at the truth, and if we want to respect him just as I wanted to respect that woman and listen to what she wanted to hear, you say, okay, Jesus, you tell me what you're all about. What do you want to be called? How do you want to be known? What is the understanding you have of your mission and your vocation? What are you all about? And how do you answer the question? Here's why I came to the world, Jesus said. I came to the world to bear witness to the truth. That's what I'm about. And then he adds to that something unbelievable. Listen to what Jesus said. Please listen to this. And everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. If you don't believe in Jesus, if you don't follow Jesus, then according to Jesus, you are not of the truth. You may say, hey, wait a minute, don't play games like that. I don't believe that Jesus is true. I don't believe that he is the truth. I understand that, but be careful here. Jesus has the evidence of history on his side in terms of his truthfulness more than any mortal that has ever walked this planet. Be careful before you call him a liar. And I just want you to understand this much at this point, according to his judgment, that if you are of the truth, you will hear him. Because he bears witness to the truth. You know what he said earlier about this? He said to his disciples, when they were confused and wanted to know the way, in fact, he said, I am the way. You know, they said, what is the way? How can we know the way? And Jesus said, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. I'm sometimes amused, although it's a shallow humor. When I hear people say things like this to me, they'll say, well, you know, I don't believe in Jesus as the Son of God, and I don't believe in all that stuff, but I think he was a wonderful teacher, and I think he was a great prophet, and I certainly admire him and respect him. And I want to say, how in the world? What are you thinking about? How can you possibly admire and respect a man if you don't believe the central message that he teaches? I listen to people all the time who are non-Christians, and they come to me and they laugh at me when they find out I'm a preacher or a teacher, a Christian. They say, oh, are you like those guys on television? You know. And they have this view of televangelism that's scandalous, that's cheap, that's superficial, and all of those things that everybody's reacting to in the culture. And I said, wait a minute, I'm a teacher, but what would you think if I came on my program on television as a teacher and I said this? Now look, ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to teach you the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, because I never say anything that's not the truth. Every word that comes out of my mouth is the truth. In fact, I am so closely connected with the truth that it would be true to say, I am the truth. Now, no televangelist has gone that far. I've seen guys make claims that were so outrageous on television. You reach across the airways, you touch the front of your television screen, and we'll touch hands in the Holy Spirit. You know, and they'll give you all this stuff, or you send in a donation to me, and I promise you God's going to bless it 10 times over, and all this magic that they promise you on television. No wonder the world is laughing. But I've yet to see one of them stand up there and say, I am the truth. And if some teacher or preacher on television stood up there and said that to the world, I am the truth, I can't think of any intelligent person walking away from that saying, well, I certainly don't believe that he's the truth, but he's a great teacher. He's a great prophet. And yet that's what we say about Jesus. If Jesus is not the Son of God, then he is the worst of all possible false prophets. Isn't he? Because he claimed to be the incarnation of truth itself. And here, before the authorities of Rome, he is saying, Pilate, here's what my kingdom's about. Here's what I'm about. I came to bear witness to the truth. And anyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And the implication is, Pilate, are you really concerned about truth? Well, what's the next question in a Pilate's mouth? What is truth, Pilate One of the limitations of any information that comes to us on the written page, sort of like the limitation that I mentioned earlier on in this lecture about radio. I couldn't see what I was imagining. When I read an account of something that takes place in history, I can't hear it. I can't see it. I'm just responding to words about it. And in this case, in this narrative, John has recorded the statement that Pilate makes, but he doesn't give me any visual description of the contours of Pilate's face, the modulation of Pilate's voice. How did he say this? How did he say what is truth? Was this one moment in Pilate's life where he was brought to cold sobriety? We know that his wife had been troubled by a dream. This man who was simply concerned about politics, who would sell his mother to quiet the mob, we know that what kind of character Pontius Pilate was. But did he have one tiny moment of morality when he's stopped in his tracks by Christ and he looks at him and he said, I've spent my whole life as a relativist. I spent my whole life dealing with images and impressions and fakery and politics and all that kind of stuff. You know, I don't even know what truth is anymore. Tell me, what is the truth? Maybe that's how he said it. Or maybe it was ridicule. Truth? What's that? What's truth? The braggadocio of the pseudo-intellectual who tries to be recognized as being intelligent because he's cynical. It's the cheapest form of pseudo-intellectualism in the world, cynicism. Anybody can be a cynic. Anybody can say, what is truth? And not really care about what is truth. The irony is that when Pilate was asking the question, what is truth? The very incarnation of truth was standing right in front of his eyes. And he missed it. Completely missed it. Well, no. He didn't completely miss it. Because look what he said. And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews. And he said to them, I find no guilt in him. The judge has delivered his verdict. I can find no fault in him. Truer words were never spoken. For once in his life, Pontius Pilate spoke the truth. Pontius Pilate bore witness to the truth. This was not a political judgment of expediency. Pilate had desperately tried to find some fault in Jesus so that he could salve his own conscience by feeding Jesus to this hungry mob. But after the interrogation, he couldn't find anything wrong. Maybe he didn't look hard enough. The reason why he couldn't find any fault in Jesus is because there wasn't any fault in Jesus. There wasn't any guilt to be found because for the first time in his life, the governor had in front of him a prisoner in chains on trial for his life who was sinless. I find no guilt in him. One of the most powerful statements of truth Pontius Pilate ever made was the words that he allegedly said in Latin, Ecce homo. Behold the man. Behold the man. See? He was saying more than he intended to say. Because the ultimate meaning of that statement is that here is true man. Here is real humanity. Truth as perceived by God himself. I find no fault in him. And Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him. How's that for a just judge? I find no fault in him, but I'll whip him, I'll beat him, I'll punish him, I'll kill him. Because the crowd didn't care about the truth. And Pilate wanted to make the right impression on the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, most people live their whole lives without spending 5 minutes in sincere pursuit of truth. And if I can plead with any human being I ever meet, I would plead with them for that one thing, that they would just stop for 5 minutes and just lay aside the impressions, lay aside the images, lay aside the preferences, and ask that question honestly: what is the truth? What's the truth about you? What is the truth about you? And what is the truth about God? If you can handle either one of those, or both of those, then you will be of the truth, and you will hear his voice, and you will run to learn from him who is the truth, who speaks the truth, and who will redeem you.